Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Glad to be with you and glad to take your phone calls and emails. If you've lived in the Pacific Northwest for very long, you understand that there are some strange politics to this region. And a guy who knows about those strange politics and writes about them regularly and has been covering a couple of the big protests recently and also a very strange situation at a bakery where two people were fired for merely telling a customer we're already closed is Andy No, who's a sub-editor at Quillette, a freelance writer and a student journalist, and we're glad to have him on the program. Andy, good to have you back.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Mr. Larson.
So tell me about this. I want you to sketch out the Back to Eden Bakery story. I've talked about it a bit, but I want you to tell the story of how these two people came to be fired because one woman said that she was racially discriminated against when she walked in after closing time.
Yeah, so this event actually took place on the evening of May 10th, but it's, as the story is now sort of just getting coverage in the local national media. So what happened is on May 10th, Miss Lillian Green, that's the woman who claimed to be a victim of racism in the story, she entered the bakery at 9:06 p.m. Now, the bakery on Alberta Street had already closed at 9 o'clock, but, you know, it's May, there's people late out at night, so they were a bit busy at closing time, but the last call had already been made. So when she came in, she was told that they're closed and that those in line already are the people being served for the night. She promptly left, and as soon as she got outside, she took out her mobile device and began recording and complaining. She said that she was denied service. She later that evening recorded a longer tirade and went more into detail about her grievances of what happened, talked about how the people who were waiting in line were white, and the fact that she's a black woman points to a bias in the business, and she called for the employees responsible to be fired. Now, Ms. Lillian Green she works as an equity director in the early learning division for the Oregon Department of Education. She's well embedded in Portland's social justice community. In the video, she calls for it to be shared, quote, far and wide, and that's exactly what her friends and followers did. So within hours, this video was getting disseminated among Portland's activist community, and by the afternoon the next day, the two female employees were informed that they were fired because of the blowback online. Now, keep in mind, this event is coming on the heels of what happened at Starbucks, in which two black men who did not purchase anything and refused to leave were arrested on camera, and that was a big PR fiasco for Starbucks. And so potentially that's what we're trying to avoid here, but they've released a series of contradictory and I would say clumsy statements. Some of them they've walked back on, some they deleted, that kind of illuminates that there was a lot of politics going on in terms of the owners being very for progressive social justice causes. And one of the fascinating things that they said in a now deleted statement is that their investigation found that their workers did not have racist intent, but that doesn't matter. What matters is what Ms. Lillian Green feels. And so that is the story.
So racism is in the eye of the beholder. So a person could operate entirely within the rules. You work at a bakery, closing time is 9. You announce that the bakery is closing. You say, we'll wait on the people who are already in the store who've already put in an order. And then you tell somebody who comes to the door, I'm sorry, we're closed. And for that, you get fired, even if you intended it as simply following the rules of the bakery and not specifically singling out somebody for their skin color, that you, the employee, get fired and effectively accused of being a racist bigot because of the way that Ms. Green took it.
Yes. See, I've been, since I re-entered academia, I've been writing and documenting the excesses of social justice quite a bit. And a lot of the pushback that I get from, I would say, the political left is that I'm cherry-picking isolated incidents that are contained on campuses. Well, living in Portland, that's there's been a trend going on for quite a while that this, I would say, ideology has spilled out of the ivory towers onto our streets, into our businesses, and into the minds of our denizens here. I wrote in a Wall Street Journal column that came out last week in which I did document, I referred to this incident that happened at Back to Eden Bakery. But even going back a couple of years, there was the incident that happened at Saffron Colonial, a restaurant in North Portland, which features historical recipes of the British Empire. And that business owner, which is a single woman with 4 children, was swamped with demonstrators, protesters accusing her of the most heinous things like racism, condoning slavery, when it had nothing to do with that. She was referring to a historical period. And ultimately, after relenting pressure, she did change the restaurant's name. After that, there was an incident last year that gained international notoriety, which was the burrito food cart, which is owned by 2 young women, and they were accused of culturally appropriating Mexican culture because neither one of them were Mexican, and they made burritos. And they received death threats. They closed their business. They went into hiding. And then after that, unfortunately, I mean, I can keep naming these out. You know, we have this event, the series of events that are happening around Portland businesses now called Reparations Happy Hours. It's since changed its name. But the point of that is people who are, quote, Black, brown, and Indigenous can come to one of these events and get cash, free cash, $10. The event is funded mostly by white donors who are not allowed to attend.
Is that even legal? Let me ask you something. I'm talking to Andy No, who's a sub-editor at Quillette. He's a freelance writer, as you've heard. He writes for the Wall Street Journal, among other places. Is it even legal for a business to say, we're going to have an event and white people are not allowed to attend, any more than it would be legal for a business to say, we're going to have an event and people of color are not allowed to attend? That doesn't sound legal, does it?
Well, here's the thing. The businesses, the first one that hosted it 2 weeks ago was the Backyard Social. It's a tavern in North Portland. Now, it was a private event that was organized by a local nonprofit called Brown Hope, which is run by community activist Cameron Whitten. So I think legally, probably nothing is a foul because it was a private event.
Oh,
and
so you can choose who you want, and you can. You could hold a private event at a commercial space, and you could say, I'm only inviting this group, and then you decide who you want to invite, and that's certainly legitimate. But if it had been open for business, they wouldn't have been able to do that. By the way, I've never seen it reported. The 2 young employees who got fired from their jobs at Back to Eden, were they both white employees, or were they people of color as well? Do you know?
So that I do know. I actually just a piece that I wrote, an in-depth investigation on what happened in the bakery, was just published last night on Quillette, and one of the women agreed to speak with me on condition of using a moniker. But we did not know that the two young women were white until the bakery released a statement last week, a Q&A, in which it was actually quite strategic because the race of the 2 bakery workers, I think, is irrelevant in the story. But the bakery said that they're under a full assault by the alt-right. That's the quote they use. And they say that the alt-right is angry that 2 white women were fired. Now, up until the point that the bakery included that information in a post on its Facebook wall, nobody knew anything about the women.
But Andy, so, I'd have to disagree with you. I think if you're talking about a story in which a woman complains that she's been turned away because of her skin color, it would make a difference. If the 2 employees had been people of color and that accusation was made, it would be a difficult one to support. it's especially difficult because these two people didn't indicate in any way, shape, or form that they were turning her away because of her skin color. But I would think that it might have made a difference in people's perception of the story if they knew that the employees who turned her away had also been people of color, but they weren't. So I guess, but that's why I think it is relevant. If you're going to talk race issues in a story, and you're going to ascribe racist attitudes to somebody, I think it's worthwhile to at least ask, well, were the two employees who turned her away black?
Well, Mr. Larson, I think that's entirely reasonable thought and logic to have in this. But when you immerse yourself into intersectional ideology and you see how it's manifest in the parlance of activists, actually, it doesn't really matter if the supposed sinner is a person of color or not. Actually, in many ways, sometimes when they are a person of color, they are subject to even more vitriol. So, for example, one of the in the piece that I wrote for Quillette, I named one of the activists who was involved in providing a lot of guidance to the bakery. His name is Cameron Witchen. He's an equity consultant and social justice activist locally here. He's been featured glowingly in many profiles. See, when he faces discrimination, what he perceives as racial discrimination by a person of color, he calls this colorism or anti-blackness. So I really think that in the minds of people who have this type of worldview, it doesn't matter if that other person is white or a person of color.
That's fair enough. But Andy, I've got a break because I'm up against the break, but I appreciate you coming on. That's Andy No. You can read what he writes at Quillette. He's a freelance writer. His work also appears in the Wall Street Journal. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show.